Thank you so much, Vitaly. It's such an honor to be part of this Smashing Meets event. As already mentioned, my name is Manuel Matuzovic. I'm a front-end developer from Vienna, and I work for the city of Vienna. And I'm specialized in HTML, CSS, and web accessibility. So these are the things that I care a lot about. And about 2.5 years ago, I conducted an experiment and I wrote an article about this experiment. Let me just quickly share my slides. Just a second. I hope that you can see my screen now. The title of this experiment or this article was Building the Most Inaccessible Site Possible with a Perfect Lighthouse Score. And this is what I want to present to you today. I want to present this experiment and what I found out. So let's start. What you can see on the screen right now is a fictional tweet by a fictional user, and it says, "Yes, we did it," party emojis, and below that you can see a screenshot of Lighthouse, Google Chrome's built-in testing tool, and there are 4 categories: performance, accessibility, best practices, and SEO. And for each category, you can see the number 100 in a green circle, indicating that this site has passed all these tests. And I'm pretty sure that most of you have seen a post like this, or maybe you posted it yourself on Twitter or on Facebook, or maybe even on LinkedIn or Xing. It really depends on the situation. Someone could say it's situational. But I guess that most of you have seen a tweet like this or a post like this. And I want you for a second to think about what you feel or what you think when you see someone post a screenshot like this. I will tell you what I think. I think this is awesome. Because for me, this means that the person who built the site didn't just build it and deploy it and ship it. No, they tested the site, and they probably didn't get a perfect score in each category. So they optimized the site, they tested some more, they optimized again, up to the point where they got perfect scores. So that's a good thing. And I think it's a good thing that you share your achievements online. You have to be, it's important to be proud of your work. And if you've built something awesome, then please share it. That's pretty cool. But at the same time, there is also criticism. There are some people who say that these numbers are just numbers and that they don't mean anything. So if you have a perfect score in performance, it doesn't mean that you have built a fast site. And that is also true. So for me, it's both. I think it's great and important that you share your achievements, but at the same time, it's important that we know how to interpret these numbers. My friend Zach Letterman, he posted again also about 2.5 years ago the following thing on Twitter. He said, "Free blog post idea, how to build the slowest website with a perfect Lighthouse score." And obviously I like that idea. I thought that it's just an amazing idea for a talk or for an article. And I started thinking, okay, what can I do to make a site really, really slow without Lighthouse noticing? And I made some notes and I had some ideas, but building a slow site with a perfect score is pretty hard in Lighthouse, I have to say. Anyways, a few minutes later, my friend Vadim posted, "That would be a wonderful read. Here's one for an accessibility audit." And next to his message, there's an image tag where he uses the same value for the alt attribute as for the source attribute. So it's an image tag, it has an alt attribute, but it's not meaningful. And this would pass an accessibility test. And when I saw that, I liked it even more because, I like performance. I care a lot about performance, but accessibility is my thing. So I started thinking and experimenting, and I spent a lot of time trying to come up with a few things. And the result was this website. I mean, it's not a website, it's just a page, but it's a pretty good page, if you ask me. Why? You know what? No, it's actually almost perfect because it's super fast. It's fast by design because it's just HTML. There's no CSS, no JavaScript. It's really, really great. And it's accessible because I'm using semantic HTML. and it's compatible. You can try any browser, even if you try what's it called, this terminal browser, I think it's Lynx, it will work. So this site is really, really great. This is my baseline for my article, and I will try to make this site as inaccessible as possible without Lighthouse noticing it. But before I do that, I have two important disclaimers. The first one is, this talk is not about Lighthouse. It's not about Google Chrome. It's not about the Google team. I've learned so much from these people, from Rob Dodson and Alex Boxall and all the people who work at Chrome and Google on accessibility. I've learned a lot about them, and I also use Lighthouse almost every day. This is really not about Lighthouse. It's also not about X or Xcore or Harris. This talk is about you. It's about you and me and how we interpret the results of automatic testing. This is what this talk is about. And this is really important that you understand this, because this talk is going to be wild. And the second disclaimer is, just in case, this talk is pretty sarcastic. Actually, the whole talk is just pure sarcasm. So I just want to make sure that you understand that that I don't mean all the things that I'm going, or most of the things that I'm going to say in the course of the next 25 minutes or so. Okay, so I built this page. I made some experiments. I put a lot of knowledge that I already have into this experiment in this article, but at the same time, I also learned a lot, of course, because when you write something, when you do a lot of research, you learn a lot. And I didn't just learn something; I was actually able to come up with my own new web development principles. You might have heard of graceful degradation or of progressive enhancement. Forget all about that. I have something new, and it's the hottest thing right now, and it's called progressive degradation. And when you apply progressive degradation to a website, you make sure that with every single line you write, the user experience for the user gets worse. So if you add a line of JavaScript to your website, you want to make sure that the accessibility gets worse. And this is what we're going to apply now to my now still perfect page, progressive degradation. All right, so this is our baseline. And the first thing I want to do is I want to add complexity to this site, because we web developers, we just love complexity. We love to configure Webpack. We love to build pipelines, and we also love to use JavaScript libraries and frameworks for pretty much anything that could go online. So let's add some complexity to this site. As already mentioned, there are no dependencies except for a stable internet connection. So let's add dependencies. The first thing I'm doing is I'm adding the hidden attribute to the body. And this removes all the content on the page. So we get a blank screen, a white screen, and I could stop now, because if I run a test, this will pass Lighthouse and X and all the testing tools, and it will be just fine. But that's just too easy. I don't want to make it too easy on myself. So I technically still want to show some content on the page. So I'm bringing the content back. I'm adding a style sheet to the site, and I'm adding a class to the body element with the name loaded. And in the style sheet, I'm selecting this loaded class, and I'm setting display to block. Now we're back again. So we see the same thing that we saw before, but now CSS is a dependency. So if for whatever reason CSS can't load, there's no content on our page. And I know what you were thinking, Manuel, come on, why wouldn't CSS load? That doesn't happen. It happens, believe me. I've been in many situations where I was in the middle of nowhere in Greece or in Italy trying to book a bus ticket or a ferry ticket, and I was happy if just anything made it over the line. So it happens. But yes, it doesn't happen often. So let's add some more complexity. Now, instead of adding this loaded class manually to the body, I remove it again from the body and I add a script. And in this script, I select the body and I add the class via JavaScript. Now, this means if JavaScript doesn't load, and that happens, if JavaScript doesn't load, the class doesn't get applied and there is no content on the page. Pretty awesome. All right, let's just do a first Lighthouse test. I'm opening DevTools. I'm switching to the Lighthouse panel. I'm clicking on Generate Report. Lighthouse is warming up. It's performing some checks. And I've only selected the accessibility category, and we have a perfect score. Of course, that was easy, nothing too fancy going on here. So it was expected that this score will be perfect. I would say it's time to get dirty. It's time to get like really dirty. Let's try to exclude screen reader users. Now, there are many ways of excluding screen reader users. We could just use divs for everything, or we could use ARIA rows in places where they make no sense to confuse them and to mess things up. But I found that the easiest way of excluding screen reader users is to use the ARIA hidden attribute in HTML and setting it to true. If you set ARIA hidden to an element, it will be removed from the accessibility tree. The accessibility tree is a representation of your HTML document similar to the DOM. So when you write HTML and you open it in a browser, the browser will construct the DOM. And the DOM is a representation of your HTML. And it consists of all the elements and its children, and you can manipulate it and so on. And the accessibility tree is also a representation of your HTML document, but one specifically for assistive technology. So it includes all the nodes on the page that are relevant to assistive technology and their accessible names and their roles and so on. And if we add ARIA hidden to an element, we remove it from the accessibility tree. Now, what I wanted to do is to add it to the body element, but I know that there is an X rule, maybe Harris even wrote it, that makes sure that you don't add ARIA hidden to the body element. So my workaround here is that I just wrap the whole content on the page in a div, and I add ARIA hidden to this parent div. And this means that now all the content is gone from the accessibility tree and screen reader users can't access it. Pretty awesome, pretty easy. Let's just run another test. I'm confident that this shouldn't be a problem because I just added an HTML attribute. This should be fine. Let's see. Oh, no. The score is now 94, and Lighthouse says ARIA hidden true elements contain focusable descendants. So the problem here is that not that I'm using ARIA hidden, but that I'm using it on an element that has focusable descendants. And in my still kind of pretty perfect page, I have a link which is focusable, an input field, and a button, and this is not allowed. I mean, it's an issue, but not a big issue. It was pretty easy to work around that. So let's look at the link. This is how the link looks like. It's just a typical A tag with an href attribute. And fixing that was easy because I'm using a pattern that I've seen on many websites. And it looks like this. Instead of using the href attribute, I remove this. So I'm turning this hyperlink into a placeholder link, and I'm replacing the href attribute with the onClick attribute, and I'm using location href. So if you click this link, you will still be redirected to the website that is linked here, but now it's not focusable anymore. And of course, you have to add some CSS to make it look like a proper link. That was easy. The next thing is our form. There's an input field and there is a button. And dealing with that again, I can get so much inspiration from just websites out there that fixing this was easy. I just turned the button into a div, and I'm also turning the input field into a div. And in order to make it editable, I add the content editable attribute to the input div. Again, of course, you would have to add some CSS to make it look like an input field and look like a button. But now these elements aren't focusable anymore. And if we run a Lighthouse test, hopefully it will work. But I know what you're thinking. You're professionals. You're saying, hey, wait a minute, Manuel, this isn't really sustainable. So what happens if someone adds, I don't know, a text area or another link? Then you would have to manually fix it again. That's true. So another way of dealing with this is to select all the focusable items on the page. Right now, I'm just selecting the input button and A, so you have to add all the other elements that are focusable to the query selector. And then I'm iterating over all elements, and I'm just setting the tab index attribute to -1. This removes the ability of this element of being focused as well. And this is much more sustainable because you have just this script lying around and it does it automatically, which is pretty awesome. And you don't have to worry about JavaScript support because if there's no JavaScript, there's no content on the page. So it's fine. Okay, let's run Lighthouse again. Now I've removed all the focusable elements. You can still add content. You can still click the button because a div is just fine. You can use div as a button. Awesome, perfect score. Okay, so our site still looks the same, but now it's completely inaccessible to screen reader users. That's great. Now I would say let's deal with the next user group, with keyboard users. Dealing with them is pretty easy, I have to say, and I'm sure that most of you have done the thing that I'm going to show you now, or at least I'm guilty of doing this. Selecting all items in their focus state and just removing the keyword focus, keyboard focus. So by setting outline to none or to 0, you're removing the visual focus indicator that tells people where in the page they are. And just to illustrate what happens if you do that, here's a quick comparison of the site with clearly visible focus indicators and without. So if I'm pressing the tab key, you can see now where on the page I am on the link or in the input field. And if I remove this, you don't see anything. You don't see, as I'm tapping the tab key, where on the page I am. And this can be really confusing. Or actually, there is one thing you see. If you look closely, you can see the input field that the caret is blinking. So you can still access the focusable elements, but you just don't see where you are. But if you figure out that you're on the input field, you would actually use it. And, I don't like that. So I'm adding some JavaScript to my site. I'm using document add event listener, and I'm adding a key down event, and I'm just preventing default. So if you press a key, the tab key, just nothing will happen. So no focus indicator, and the keys just don't do anything. And the beautiful thing about my new principle, progressive degradation, is that you're working on one thing and at the same time you're fixing another thing. So all I wanted to do is to make this site inaccessible to keyboard users, but at the same time I disabled zoom. So if you try to press Control plus or Command plus on this page, it won't work. Isn't that beautiful? All right, let's just run a test. I'm confident that the score is still 100 because it's fine to remove the outline normally. As long as you provide custom styling, it's fine. So this shouldn't be a problem. Awesome. Whew, okay. Now, I would say it's time to deal with, the most privileged user group, with mouse users. And dealing with mouse users, again, is pretty easy. The only thing I have to do is I select all items in their default state and in their hover state, and I'm setting cursor to none. Cursor none is to mouse users what outline none is to keyboard users. So there is still a mouse, but I just remove it and you can't see where on the page your mouse is and which items you can click. And that's pretty awesome. So this is one way of dealing with mouse users. There's another way, and it's called the bug offset. This is a term coined by my developer friend Max Böck. And if you apply the bug offset, then you take the default cursor, you open it in an image editing tool, and you increase the width of the cursor by 100 pixels. And you align the actual cursor on the very right. And then you save this and you use this custom cursor in your CSS. And what happens is that now you have a pretty wide cursor. The visual cursor, so the icon is on the right, but the actual area where you're clicking is on the very left, offset by 100 pixels. So users think that they're clicking at one place, but actually they're clicking or hovering 100 pixels to the left. And this is so evil. Yeah, here's a demo. So what you see on the screen is a pretty basic user interface. There's just a paragraph with some links and 3 buttons. And as I'm hovering the first button, nothing happens. When I hover the second button, the first button shows hover styles. When I hover the third button, the second button shows hover styles. So it's really complicated and really messed up. But at some point, users will figure out what's going on. So they will figure out that they just have to click 100 pixels to the right. And I don't want that, of course. So again, I just add some more CSS. I'm using the point events property, and I set it to none. So you don't see the cursor anymore, and you can't click anything. Pretty cool. Yeah, that's pretty great. If you really don't care about your users, you might want to add a polyfill, because this property is not supported in Opera Mini in extreme mode. So this piece of JavaScript checks if pointer events is supported. If it is, it just returns. If it's not supported, it adds a click event to the body, and it prevents default. So this way you can make sure that you really exclude as many people as possible. And you know what? Actually, I like this solution more than the CSS solution, because CSS is just such a weak language, and HTML is also a weak language. And I'd rather use JavaScript, a strong language. So instead of using it as a polyfill, I just use JavaScript in the first place. And this actually brings me to the second principle that I came up with, which is the rule of most power. And the rule of most power says that if for any given task you can use, for any given task that you have, use the most powerful and the strongest language. So for example, if you want to add a paragraph to a page, don't use the P element in HTML, use canvas in JavaScript. Okay, let's run another Lighthouse test and see what's happening. Fingers crossed. Awesome. Still 100. That's just perfect. And I conducted this experiment 2.5 years ago, as already mentioned, and I decided to turn it into a talk this year. So I asked some friends on Twitter if they have any tips, if they can help me make my website even more exclusive. And Alvaro said, yes, your website is already pretty exclusive, but I noticed that on mobile, you can still select the text. And this is, of course, bad. I don't want it. I don't want people to be able to select text and to copy it, maybe. And he even provided me with the fix. He just said, select all the items in the user select. I just select all the items and set user select to none. And this is so beautiful about our web community. So if you need to find a way to exclude more people, there's always someone who will try to help you. That's just really beautiful. Okay, so we got rid of the ability to select stuff on the page, which is pretty nice. The next thing I want to deal with is Windows High Contrast Mode. Windows High Contrast Mode is really interesting. So there's this option on Windows where you can switch from the default theme in Windows to a very high contrasting theme. So on this screen, you can see Windows and my page on Windows. And the background color is black, and actually the whole operating system is black, and the text colors are yellow. And yellow and black has a very high contrast ratio. And this is especially interesting or helpful for people with low vision. The cool thing about high contrast mode is that we can react to it in CSS. So we can query, you could say, high contrast mode. There's a media feature called MS High Contrast Active. So we can use media queries to provide specific styling for people who are using high contrast mode. Now, the first thing that I thought of is I'm just going to select all the items on the page and I'm setting the color to black. So when the background color is black and the text color is black, there's nothing you can see on the screen, and you can't even select it, the text. So that's pretty awesome. But the problem about Windows High Contrast Mode is that there are different themes. So there are dark themes and light themes, and users can choose their colors. So this wouldn't work in all situations. Again, not exclusive enough for me. But there is a cool thing in CSS called system colors. And there are several keywords that map to specific parts of your user interface. So for example, if I use the window keyword, it always maps, or it always matches the background color of the website. So if the background color is black, the text is black. If the background color is white, the text is white. So if I select all items on the page and I set the color to window, you can see now that all you can see on this page is a black screen, except for the border of the button and the input field, which shows a white border. And this is pretty evil. And honestly, I actually expected Facebook to knock on my door and hire me, but they just never got in touch. I don't know. Maybe that wasn't evil enough for them. I don't know. Anyways, let's run another test and let's see what happens. Lighthouse is warming up and this should be fine. This shouldn't be a problem. Let's see. Okay, awesome. All right, now I've removed all the interactivity from the website. It's not accessible to screen reader users. You can't use the keyboard, you can't use the mouse, you can't select text on mobile and also on desktop. And if you're using Windows High Contrast Mode, you don't see anything. But if you just look, if you're sighted and you just look at the text, you can still read it, and I don't want that. And again, I don't want to use display none or visibility hidden or opacity 0 because that's just too easy. So I'm just setting the opacity to 0.03. So technically there is still some content on the page, but you can't read it. I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but there are some, you can see that there is a paragraph, there are some shades of gray, but it's not really readable. And I guess that's pretty much it. I just ran another Lighthouse test and I would say it's a wrap. Okay. Oh, no. 94 again. What does it say? Background and foreground colors do not have sufficient contrast ratio. Okay. Now, I have to say, 2.5 years ago, when I conducted this experiment, this worked. This wasn't an issue. And I think in the meantime, they fixed it. And I like to believe that they did it because of me. I don't know if that's the case, actually, but let's just say that they fixed it because of me. And this was a tough one, because if I can't use visibility hidden, I can't use display none, opacity 0 doesn't work, any value between 0 and 1 doesn't work, what can I do? But I figured it out because, I've been around for a while. I've been a professional web developer for 13 years and I know my CSS. And the thing I did is I started experimenting with the filter property and the blur function. So I just used blur and I increased the blur value up to a point where the content just wasn't visible anymore. And then I ran another test and it just worked fine. This will take some time now because I don't know, maybe it's taking longer because of filter, because filter can be a performance bottleneck sometime, but this worked. So there is a loophole of you can just use filter. And while I was using filter, or actually researching the filter property, I found out, or I stumbled upon, the opacity function as a value for the filter property. So instead of using the opacity property, you can use the opacity function and just pass the value that you want for your site. And if we use that, let's see what happens. Yes, perfect score. The website is almost invisible. It's not interactive anymore. It's inaccessible to screen reader users, and we have a perfect score. Now, I don't believe that this should work. So, of course, I went ahead and I found the Xcore GitHub repository and I created an issue. I explained what I found and how I found it. And the people who maintain the repository were very quick with answering, and they told me that they know that filter can be an issue, but it's pretty hard to write tests for the filter property for some reason. And they also said that if you encounter real life problems, so not just like this messing around that I'm doing, but a real life test, then please share it. So if you have a content accessibility issue that were caused by the filter property, please share it with the Xcore team. All right. Now, the readers of my blog and the people who read articles like that are usually quite tech savvy. So I know that that they can make a right click in the page and just select the page source and read the content like that, because that's possible, of course. And again, I don't want that. So my solution here is that I've translated or transformed the text into HTML entities. And I don't believe that anyone can read entities fluently. Yes, so I've dealt with that as well. All right, I would say let's do another Lighthouse test, the final one. The website is pretty much useless and we should get a perfect score. Awesome. Now, again, I didn't pick Lighthouse because it's the worst tool. There are many tools. I picked Lighthouse back then because it's, I believe, the most well-known tool, because first of all, it comes with Google Chrome, so it's built into the browser. And even if you don't test accessibility, if you don't know what accessibility is, you probably know what Lighthouse is, because you might have performed some performance test or best practices or search engine optimizations and so on. But I have to say that Lighthouse was also the most forgiving tool, because Harris already mentioned that Lighthouse uses Xcore, but it only uses a subset of all the rules. And yes, that was 2.5 years ago. And for the talk now, I wanted to find out what happens if I run this site in Xcore. Harris just showed us a tool, so let's try this. Let's see what happens if I switch in my Chrome browser to the XDevTools tab. I scan the page. Oh, one issue. And it says, page must have means to bypass repeated blocks. And X wants me to either add a skip link or a heading or a landmark region. Okay, no problem, I can do that. I will just add a skip link, and the skip link points to an element that doesn't exist. I make sure that it's hidden somewhere off screen. And of course, I add the tab index attribute with the value -1, just so that I don't cause any issues with previous tests. Fine, and that's pretty much it. So if I run another X test, it will show 0 errors. Now let's see what happens if I use another tool, if I use Wave. So I right-click the page, I say wave this page. Oh, and there's one more issue. Let's see, it says broken skip link. Okay, so Wave is a little bit smarter than X. It says there is a skip link, but it points to an element that doesn't exist. And my fix is that I just add this ID to the link. So the skip link points to itself. It's pretty useless, but it works. If I run another Wave test, we can see that there are 0 errors. And that's it. Okay, I know that was a lot of sarcasm, especially for a talk about web accessibility, but I just tried to find a way to highlight that these numbers that you see in your accessibility testing tools are in fact just numbers. And again, this is not about the tools. I love all of these tools. I love X, especially X. I use it actually every day. And I like Lighthouse as well, and also Wave. I use all of them. This is not about these tools. This is about you and me. So the next time when you run a test on your site and you get a perfect score in Lighthouse and you get 0 errors in Wave and 0 errors in X, your journey doesn't end there. It starts there. This is where the real testing begins. This is when you want to use the tab key to test the keyboard accessibility of your site. This is when you want to use a screen reader to test the accessibility of your site. This talk is also available as an article. It's on my website. The title of the talk and the article is Building the Most Inaccessible Site Possible with a Perfect Lighthouse Score. And that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this talk, and you can find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is mmatuzo. That's 2 M's, ATUZO. And I'm also on Twitter as HTM_hell. And I also have a blog. And yeah, if you have any questions, please ask or visit Twitter and say hi. Thanks a lot.
So thank you so much, Manuel. Well, look at you You used to be a very kind person who really deeply cares about accessibility. Now you're just HTML hell and making websites inaccessible in Lighthouse. But this is, I
Yes.
guess, the spirit of where we are at the moment.
Yes,
But thank you
absolutely.
for those insights. It's very interesting and very useful to see just how we could actually still improve the tooling, and also in terms of accessibility, just in general. What are some of the things that are kind of just need to be considered before we even say, okay, we call it a day, and we are very happy with the final result. Right, so that's very nice to hear as well.